You cut carbs. You ate enough fat. You followed keto exactly as planned, but your body still isn't burning fat. What if the real problem has nothing to do with food at all? In this video, we're going beyond keto and exposing the two hidden forces that can completely shut down fat burning: sleep and stress, even when your diet looks perfect on paper.
Why keto alone doesn't guarantee fat burning. Many people approach keto with a straightforward expectation: remove carbohydrates, increase fat, enter ketosis, and fat burning will naturally follow. On paper, this logic makes sense. Ketones appear, insulin drops, and the body should switch to using fat as its primary fuel. Yet in practice, a large number of people follow keto precisely and still find that fat loss stalls, energy remains unstable, or they feel persistently tired. This disconnect exists because fat burning is not controlled by diet alone. The core misunderstanding is assuming that metabolism is governed purely by nutrient input. In reality, metabolism is governed by signals, not rules. The body does not simply respond to macros, it responds to the overall environment those macros exist within. Keto can create the potential for fat burning, but it does not guarantee that the body will actually choose to burn fat. From an evolutionary perspective, fat burning is not the body's highest priority. Survival is. Fat oxidation is an efficient, long-term energy strategy, but it is not ideal in situations the body perceives as unstable or threatening. In those conditions, the body prefers fast, controllable energy, glucose, even if carbohydrates are limited. This is why fat burning is best understood as a permission-based process, not an automatic outcome. When someone adopts keto, the body immediately evaluates whether this change is safe and sustainable. Is energy intake sufficient? Is stress low or high? Is sleep adequate? Are daily routines consistent? If the answer to these questions is uncertain, the body hedges its bets. It may produce ketones, but it keeps glucose metabolism active in the background as a backup. This results in partial adaptation, ketosis without efficient fat burning. Another reason keto alone doesn't guarantee fat burning is that ketosis and fat oxidation are not the same thing. Ketosis simply reflects ketone production, primarily by the liver. Fat burning, however, depends on tissues, especially muscles and mitochondria, being able to use fat and ketones efficiently. That adaptation requires time, energy, hormonal support, and a low-stress internal environment. Without those conditions, ketones may circulate without being fully utilized. There is also a psychological component. Many people treat keto as a control system: stricter rules, tighter macros, fewer calories, more discipline. Unfortunately, the body does not interpret restriction as optimization. It interprets it as potential scarcity. When restriction is layered on top of stress, poor sleep, or heavy training, keto becomes another stressor rather than a solution. In that context, fat burning is suppressed, not enhanced. Perhaps most importantly, keto does not override the nervous system. The brain and stress response systems always sit above diet in the metabolic hierarchy. If the nervous system is signaling danger, urgency, or depletion, fat burning is deprioritized regardless of how clean the diet looks. This is why people can be doing everything right and still feel metabolically stuck. In short, keto creates the opportunity for fat burning, but it does not force it. Fat burning only turns on when the body perceives safety, stability, and sufficient energy. Understanding this distinction shifts the focus away from stricter dieting and toward creating the internal conditions that actually allow fat metabolism to function as intended.
Fat burning is often framed as a metabolic process governed by diet, hormones, or calorie balance. While these factors matter, they are not the first layer of control. The primary gatekeeper of fat burning is the nervous system. Until the nervous system signals that the environment is safe, stable, and predictable, the body will not fully commit to using fat as its main fuel, no matter how perfect the diet looks. The nervous system's core function is survival. It constantly evaluates whether conditions support long-term efficiency or require short-term responsiveness. Fat burning is an efficient, steady energy strategy, but it is slow to mobilize. Glucose, on the other hand, is fast and controllable. When the nervous system perceives threat, urgency, or instability, it prioritizes glucose-based energy because it allows rapid response. This hierarchy exists regardless of dietary intent. When someone adopts a low-carb or ketogenic diet, the nervous system does not automatically interpret this as an upgrade. Instead, it asks critical questions. Is energy consistently available? Is stress high or low? Is sleep sufficient? Are routines predictable? If the answers are unclear or inconsistent, the nervous system stays in a defensive mode. In that state, fat burning is suppressed, not because fat is unavailable, but because relying on it feels risky. This is why people can produce ketones, yet still feel fatigued, foggy, or unstable. Ketone production is largely a liver-driven process. Fat burning, however, depends on coordinated nervous system signaling that allows tissues to use fat and ketones confidently. If the nervous system is sending stress signals, muscles and mitochondria remain biased toward glucose, even when carbohydrates are scarce. Stress is the most common disruptor of this process. Psychological stress, poor sleep, excessive training, undereating, constant stimulation, and irregular schedules all activate the sympathetic nervous system. This state is characterized by elevated cortisol and adrenaline, hormones that raise blood sugar and inhibit fat oxidation. From the nervous system's perspective, this makes sense. In a stressful environment, fast fuel is safer than slow fuel. Importantly, this stress does not need to feel extreme. Many people live in a state of low-grade activation, wired but tired, mentally busy, restless, or constantly on. This is enough to keep the nervous system from shifting into the parasympathetic restorative state, where fat burning is allowed to dominate. The body may comply with dietary changes at a surface level, but it does not reorganize internally. Another overlooked factor is predictability. The nervous system values consistency. Erratic meal timing, frequent fasting changes, inconsistent training intensity, and constant dietary tweaking all signal uncertainty. Even if each change is logical, the cumulative effect is instability. The nervous system responds by maintaining flexibility, keeping glucose pathways active as a backup. Fat burning turns on fully when the nervous system perceives safety and sufficiency. This requires adequate energy intake, manageable stress, consistent routines, quality sleep, and appropriate training loads. When these conditions are met repeatedly, the nervous system downshifts, cortisol falls, insulin stabilizes, and fat oxidation becomes the preferred strategy, not by force, but by permission. In short, fat burning is not unlocked by macros alone. It is enabled when the nervous system decides that long-term efficiency is safe. Until that decision is made, the body will continue to hedge its bets. Understanding this shifts the focus from stricter dieting to creating an internal environment where fat metabolism is finally allowed to function as designed.
The role of sleep in fat metabolism. Sleep is one of the most underestimated regulators of fat metabolism. While diet and exercise receive most of the attention, sleep quietly determines whether those inputs translate into fat loss or metabolic resistance. From a physiological perspective, sleep is not passive downtime. It is an active regulatory state where the body decides whether energy can be safely released or must be conserved. At the most basic level, sleep governs insulin sensitivity.
Even short periods of sleep deprivation increase insulin resistance independent of diet. This means that a person can eat low carb, maintain ketosis, and still experience impaired glucose handling if sleep is insufficient. When insulin sensitivity drops, the body becomes less efficient at managing energy, and fat oxidation is suppressed. The metabolism shifts toward conservation, not because fuel is unavailable, but because recovery signals are missing. Sleep also directly regulates cortisol. Cortisol follows a circadian rhythm that is tightly synchronized with the sleep-wake cycle. High-quality sleep allows cortisol to peak in the morning and decline throughout the day. When sleep is disrupted, either in duration or quality, this rhythm flattens. Cortisol remains elevated longer than it should, increasing blood glucose availability and signaling the body to preserve stored energy. In this state, fat loss is biologically inappropriate. Beyond hormones, sleep is critical for nervous system regulation. Deep sleep is when the nervous system downshifts into parasympathetic dominance. This is the state associated with repair, digestion, hormonal recalibration, and fat oxidation. Without adequate deep sleep, the nervous system remains biased towards sympathetic activity, alert, vigilant, and defensive. Fat burning is incompatible with that state. Sleep also coordinates appetite regulation. Leptin and ghrelin, hormones that influence satiety and hunger, are synchronized during sleep. Poor sleep lowers leptin and raises ghrelin, increasing hunger and cravings while reducing satiety signals. This creates the illusion of dietary failure when the real issue is hormonal disruption driven by sleep debt. Another overlooked factor is consistency. The nervous system values predictable sleep-wake timing as a signal of environmental stability. Irregular bedtimes, late-night stimulation, and circadian misalignment all communicate uncertainty. Even if total sleep hours are adequate, inconsistent timing can keep the nervous system cautious and fat metabolism restrained. One of the most powerful aspects of sleep is that its effects are immediate. A single night of poor sleep can override days of dietary precision. Conversely, improving sleep quality often restores fat-burning capacity without any change in food intake. This is because sleep acts upstream of metabolism. It sets the conditions under which metabolic decisions are made. In the context of fat adaptation, sleep is often the missing piece. The body may be biochemically capable of burning fat, but without sleep-driven safety signals, it will not fully commit to doing so. Fat metabolism is not forced awake by restriction. It is invited forward by recovery. Understanding the role of sleep reframes fat loss entirely. Sleep is not a supplement to diet. It is a prerequisite for metabolic permission. Without it, fat metabolism remains limited. With it, the system regains the trust required to release stored energy efficiently and sustainably.
Chronic stress, the fat-burning kill switch. Chronic stress is one of the most powerful inhibitors of fat burning, yet it is often dismissed as a mindset issue rather than a physiological one. From the body's perspective, stress is not defined by emotions alone. It is defined by signals that indicate threat, urgency, or instability. When those signals persist, fat metabolism is intentionally downregulated. Cortisol sits at the center of this response. Cortisol's primary role is to ensure that energy is available during perceived threat. It does this by increasing glucose production in the liver through gluconeogenesis. This mechanism is essential in short bursts, but when cortisol remains elevated for extended periods, the body is continuously chronic stress, the fat-burning kill switch. Chronic stress is one of the most powerful inhibitors of fat burning, yet it is often dismissed as a mindset issue rather than a physiological one. From the body's perspective, stress is not defined by emotions alone. It is defined by signals that indicate threat,
urgency, or instability. When those signals persist, fat metabolism is intentionally downregulated. Cortisol sits at the center of this response. Cortisol's primary role is to ensure that energy is available during perceived threat. It does this by increasing glucose production in the liver through gluconeogenesis. This mechanism is essential in short bursts, but when cortisol remains elevated for extended periods, the body is continuously flooded with glucose. Under these conditions, there is no metabolic incentive to release fat. Fast, reliable sugar is already available. This is why chronic stress keeps the body dependent on glucose. The nervous system prioritizes fuels that can be mobilized instantly and predictably. Fat is a slow, long-term energy source. Releasing it requires confidence that energy demands will be met consistently. Under chronic stress, that confidence never develops. The system remains biased toward sugar, even when dietary carbohydrates are low. Importantly, this glucose dependence does not require overeating or sugar consumption. Cortisol can elevate blood glucose independent of food intake. Someone can be fasting, eating ketogenic, or training intensely and still experience elevated glucose because stress hormones are doing the work. Fat burning is suppressed not because fat is unavailable, but because sugar is being artificially maintained. This is where the concept of being busy but disciplined backfires. Many people pride themselves on maintaining strict routines under high stress. Long work hours, early workouts, aggressive fasting, and tight dietary control. On the surface, this looks like commitment. Physiologically, it looks like chronic threat. The body interprets constant output without sufficient recovery as an unstable environment. Under these conditions, cortisol remains elevated, sympathetic nervous system activity dominates, and fat oxidation is deprioritized. The metabolism becomes rigid, weight loss stalls, energy fluctuates, hunger becomes erratic. None of this is due to lack of discipline. It is a predictable response to sustained pressure. Over time, this pattern creates metabolic inflexibility. The body loses the ability to transition smoothly between fuels. Sugar remains the default, even when it is not desired. Fat stores remain protected, even when they are plentiful. The system is not broken, it is stuck in survival mode. This is why reducing stress often produces fat loss without any change in diet. When cortisol normalizes and the nervous system downshifts, glucose production decreases. The body no longer needs to keep sugar elevated. Fat oxidation becomes accessible again. Chronic stress is not a motivation problem to be overcome. It is a biological signal that must be resolved. Until stress is addressed, fat burning remains locked. Once it is, the metabolic brakes release, not through force, but through safety.
Why stress plus keto is a common trap. Combining a ketogenic or very low carbohydrate diet with high stress is one of the most common ways people unintentionally block fat loss. Keto is often framed as a metabolic shortcut, but when recovery is poor, low-carb eating can become an additional stressor rather than a solution. The result is a system that appears compliant on paper, low carbs, elevated ketones, but remains physiologically resistant to fat burning. Low carbohydrate intake reduces glucose availability. In a well-recovered system, this can encourage fat oxidation and metabolic flexibility. In a stressed system, however, reduced glucose is interpreted as scarcity. If sleep is inadequate, workloads are high, and recovery is limited, the nervous system does not interpret low carbs as optimization, it interprets them as risk. Cortisol rises to compensate, driving internal glucose production and reinforcing sugar dependence. This is where multiple stressors begin to stack. Undereating reduces perceived energy availability. Overtraining increases physiological demand. Mental pressure from work,
Schedules or rigid dietary rules add psychological threat. Each factor alone might be manageable. Together, they create a continuous signal of instability. The nervous system responds by staying in sympathetic dominance, keeping fat stores protected and metabolism defensive. In this state, keto no longer feels calming or stabilizing. People often describe feeling wired but tired. Energy is present, but it is brittle. Sleep may feel light or unrefreshing. Focus can be sharp but restless. Hunger may fluctuate unpredictably. Weight loss stalls despite strict adherence. These are not signs of poor discipline. They are signs of a system running on stress hormones rather than stable fuel access. The trap deepens because the external markers of keto still appear positive. Carbohydrates are low. Ketones may be measurable. Fasting windows are extended. From the outside, it looks like fat loss should be happening. When it does not, people assume they need to tighten control further. More restriction is applied, training intensity increases, recovery is delayed again. This creates a feedback loop where the very strategy meant to reduce metabolic stress is amplifying it. Keto becomes another demand rather than a relief. The nervous system never receives a signal of sufficiency. Fat burning remains locked, not because keto is ineffective, but because safety is absent. The feeling of being stuck is the natural outcome of this mismatch. The body is capable of burning fat, but it will not do so under sustained pressure. Until stress is reduced, recovery improves, and energy availability feels reliable, combining keto with high stress keeps metabolism in a holding pattern. Breaking this trap does not require abandoning low-carb eating. It requires restoring recovery. When sleep improves, training load is appropriate, and mental pressure decreases, keto can shift from a stressor back into a supportive tool. Signs sleep and stress are blocking fat burning. When sleep and stress are the limiting factors, fat loss does not fail in obvious ways. Diet may be consistent. Carbohydrates may be low. Ketones may even be present. Yet progress feels stalled, fragile, or unstable. The key signals show up not in compliance, but in regulation. One of the earliest signs is a mismatch between dietary stability and energy stability. Food intake is consistent, meals are predictable, and macros are controlled, yet energy fluctuates day to day. Some mornings feel wired, others flat. Afternoon crashes persist despite low-carb eating. This inconsistency is not random. It reflects a nervous system that has not settled into a stable fuel strategy. When sleep is poor or stress is high, energy is governed by stress hormones rather than fat oxidation. The system never fully commits to steady fuel access. Another common sign is the presence of ketones without endurance or calm. Ketones are often interpreted as proof that fat burning is active. In reality, ketone production only indicates that fat is being processed in the liver. It does not guarantee that tissues are using fat efficiently. When sleep and stress are compromised, ketones can coexist with jittery energy, shallow focus, or rapid fatigue. Instead of calm, sustained output, energy feels sharp but short-lived. This suggests that the nervous system is still prioritizing quick access fuels and stress signaling over long-term efficiency. A particularly telling sign is fatigue that does not improve with time. Early adaptation fatigue is normal during metabolic transitions, but when weeks pass and fatigue remains unchanged or worsens despite dietary consistency, recovery is the missing variable. Poor sleep prevents nervous system downshifting. Chronic stress keeps cortisol elevated. Under these conditions, the body never exits conservation mode. Fat oxidation remains limited, and energy availability stays constrained. This type of fatigue often feels different from simple tiredness. It is not relieved by rest days or additional caffeine. Sleep may be long but unrefreshing. Motivation may be present, but capacity is low. This indicates that the issue is not effort, but restoration. The system is running, but it is not recovering. Another subtle sign is emotional or cognitive strain around food and performance. When sleep and stress are blocking fat burning, the mind remains vigilant. Thoughts about timing, optimization, or control persist. This mental tension mirrors physiological tension. A relaxed metabolism rarely coexists with a hyper-alert nervous system. These signs are easy to misinterpret as dietary failure or lack of discipline. In reality, they are signals that the body does not yet feel safe enough to release energy. Recognizing them early prevents unnecessary restriction and escalation. When sleep improves and stress decreases, these patterns often resolve before fat loss appears. Energy stabilizes, endurance improves, fatigue lifts gradually. These changes signal that fat burning is becoming accessible again.
How to restore fat burning without changing your diet. Restoring fat burning does not always require changing what you eat. In many stalled cases, the diet is already adequate. The limitation is not nutritional input, but the signals the body is receiving about safety and recovery. Before altering food, the most effective intervention is often lowering stress signals that are blocking energy release. The body prioritizes survival over efficiency. When stress is high, whether from poor sleep, psychological pressure, excessive training, or constant optimization, the nervous system shifts into a protective state. In that state, fat oxidation is intentionally suppressed. The first step in restoring fat burning is reducing these stress signals. This does not mean eliminating stress entirely, but bringing it back within a manageable range. Reducing training volume, softening fasting rigidity, and creating predictable daily rhythms all communicate stability to the nervous system. Sleep consistency is one of the most powerful metabolic levers available. It is not just the number of hours slept, but the regularity of sleep timing that matters. Going to bed and waking up at consistent times reinforces circadian alignment. This predictability signals safety. When the nervous system trusts that recovery will occur reliably, it relaxes its grip on stored energy. Fat burning becomes accessible again without any change in calories or macros. Improving sleep quality also lowers baseline cortisol. Deep, uninterrupted sleep allows stress hormones to normalize and insulin sensitivity to improve. This hormonal shift reduces the body's reliance on glucose and reopens pathways for fat oxidation. Many people notice more stable energy, calmer hunger, and improved endurance within days of improving sleep, even before any change in body weight occurs. The final piece is creating what can be called energy safety. Energy safety is the body's belief that energy demands will be met consistently without threat. This is built through regular meals when needed, sufficient protein, adequate total calories, and recovery periods that are respected. Skipping meals aggressively, pushing through fatigue, or constantly changing routines undermines this sense of safety. When energy safety is established, the nervous system no longer needs to hedge by conserving fat. It allows stored energy to be released because the risk of scarcity has been removed. Fat loss resumes as a byproduct of stability, not force. This approach often feels counterintuitive because it does not involve doing more. It involves doing less but more consistently. The metabolism responds not to intensity, but to reliability. When stress is lowered, sleep is consistent, and energy feels secure, fat burning turns back on naturally. The key insight is that diet sets the stage, but recovery gives permission. When permission is restored, fat loss no longer requires change, it requires trust.
Reframing success beyond keto. Fat burning is often framed as something a diet turns on, with keto positioned as the switch. But fat burning is not a dietary state, it is a physiological one. Diet can influence which fuels are available, but it does not decide whether those fuels are used. That decision is made by the nervous system based on perceived safety, recovery, and stability. When fat burning is viewed as a state rather than a diet, stalled progress becomes easier to understand and resolve. This is why calming the system often unlocks results faster than changing macros. When stress is reduced and sleep is consistent, cortisol normalizes, insulin sensitivity improves, and the body stops defending its energy reserves. Fat oxidation increases not because of effort, but because resistance is removed. Many people experience renewed fat loss without stricter dieting simply by restoring recovery. The system finally feels safe enough to release energy. Short-term dieting often prioritizes control and intensity. Carbohydrates are restricted, calories are tightly managed, and fasting is pushed aggressively. These approaches can produce rapid changes on the scale, but they rarely build metabolic resilience. Underneath, stress accumulates, recovery erodes, and flexibility is lost. The body becomes efficient at conserving energy, not using it. Long-term metabolic flexibility is different. It is the ability to shift smoothly between fuels based on demand, without spikes, crashes, or rigidity. This flexibility is built through consistent sleep, manageable stress, adequate nutrition, and appropriate training. Keto can support this process, but it cannot replace it. Reframing success beyond keto shifts the goal from adherence to regulation. Progress is no longer measured by ketones or restriction, but by stability, calm energy, predictable hunger, restorative sleep, and sustainable output. When those markers improve, fat loss follows naturally. The most effective strategy is not to chase the perfect diet, but to create the internal conditions where fat burning is allowed to happen. Keto is a tool. Safety is the key. Keto does not fail because the diet is ineffective. It fails when it is applied in the wrong context. Lowering carbohydrates can change fuel availability, but it cannot override a body that does not feel safe. When sleep is poor, stress is chronic, and recovery is missing, the metabolism responds appropriately by conserving energy. What looks like a dietary failure is almost always a regulatory one. Fat burning does not begin when carbs are low or ketones are high. It begins when the body perceives stability. Safety is the prerequisite. When the nervous system senses predictable sleep, manageable stress, and reliable energy availability, it relaxes its defensive posture. Only then does fat oxidation become the preferred strategy. This is why many people stall despite doing keto perfectly, and why others see results return without changing their diet at all. Understanding this reframes fat loss entirely. It is not a problem to force through discipline or restriction. It is a process to support by removing the signals that keep the system guarded. When stress hormones normalize, sleep deepens, and recovery is respected, the brakes come off. Fat burning resumes not because of effort, but because resistance is gone. This perspective also explains why chasing optimization often backfires. More fasting, harder training, and tighter control may look productive, but in a stressed system, they reinforce the very signals that block fat loss. The solution is rarely more intensity. It is alignment. In the next video, we will look at how to align sleep, stress, and nutrition into a single, coherent system, so fat burning is supported from every direction instead of undermined by conflicting signals. You will learn how to create an environment where metabolism works with you, not against you. If this video brought clarity to why fat loss can stall even with the right diet, consider subscribing. This channel is focused on science-based metabolic clarity, so you can stop guessing, stop forcing, and start understanding how your body actually works.